knowing the right thing doesn't mean you'll do it. You're likely caught between two approaches to change. One treats stubborn habits as a systems problem, using cues and repetition to make progress automatic. The other sees a desire problem where you must retrain what you love through deeper personal practices. The solution depends on whether you need a better environment, a clearer plan, or a complete reordering of your heart. Atomic Habits by James Clear begins with a blunt claim. People often think they lack motivation when they really lack clarity. That matters for stubbornness because stubbornness is often not rebellion, it is drift. You say you will change, but you never pin the behavior to a time, a place, or a trigger. So the habit floats in the air and never lands. That is why implementation intentions work so well in this framework. The formula is simple. I will behavior at time and location, and the book argues that this kind of specificity can dramatically improve follow-through compared with vague intentions. If you keep telling yourself, I need to be better, but never decide when better happens, your brain gets to stay lazy and your life stays the same. Here is the right way in this model. You are trying to stop putting off exercise, so you decide, after I close my laptop at 5 p.m., I will put on my workout shoes and walk outside for 10 minutes. That works because the cue is visible, the response is tiny, and the decision is already made before the moment arrives. Here is the wrong way. I should exercise more this week. That sounds wise, but it gives your stubborn self too much room to negotiate. Now compare that with the lens of You Are What You Love by James K.A. Smith. It would say the issue is not just that you need a better plan, but that your deepest habits are tied to your loves, and your loves are being trained by the practices around you. In other words, the same person who keeps missing exercise may not just need a calendar reminder, he may need a new story about what kind of life is worth wanting. That is the first major difference. Atomic Habits says, make the next move obvious. You Are What You Love says make the good life desirable at the level of desire itself. For a stubborn person, that means one approach tries to close the gap between intention and action, while the other tries to change what intention even feels like. James Clear then tightens the screw with habit stacking. Instead of building a habit from nothing, you tie it to something you already do, using a formula like, after current habit, I will new habit. This is useful because your day is already full of reliable cues. The trick is to borrow them. If you are stubborn about journaling, the wrong way is to wait for a mystical burst of discipline. The right way is to say, after I brush my teeth at night, I will write one sentence in my journal. That is small enough to survive resistance, but specific enough to survive forgetfulness. The real win here is not intensity, it is repetition. The practical value is obvious. You can stack a new habit onto coffee, meals, commuting, bedtime, or any routine that already exists. The view in Atomic Habits is almost mechanical in the best sense. If the cue is consistent, the action becomes easier to repeat, and repeated action becomes automatic. You Are What You Love does not reject repetition, but it gives repetition a different meaning. Repetition is not just a trick for locking in behavior, it is a way of being formed by a story, a practice, and a community. In that framework, the repeated act matters because it is quietly training your loves, not just your schedule. So if you are trying to cure stubbornness, habit stacking gives you the how, while You Are What You Love asks whether the habit is actually becoming part of the kind of person you are becoming. One is about attaching action to action. The other is about attaching action to identity. Atomic Habits gets sharper in its argument when it says environment matters more than motivation. That is a direct hit against stubbornness, because many stubborn people keep trying to win a war of willpower instead of changing the battlefield. The book's point is simple. If the cookies are on the counter, if the phone is beside you, if the TV is in the bedroom, your choices are already being pushed before you consciously decide anything. This is where the right versus wrong example becomes brutally practical. Wrong. You leave junk food in sight, keep distracting apps open, and tell yourself you will be stronger today. Right, you make good cues obvious and bad cues invisible, so your environment starts helping instead of testing you. That is not weakness, that is design. A stubborn person often believes self-control means white-knuckling temptation. James Clear says the better self-controlled people are often the ones who simply avoid tempting situations more often. That is a very important correction, because it removes some of the shame from failure and replaces it with responsibility for design. You are what you love agrees that environments shape you, but it deepens the claim. It says your surroundings are not just neutral spaces full of objects. They are places loaded with practices that train your heart. The mall, the home, the classroom, even ordinary routines are not just backdrops, but formative forces that teach you what to desire. So when you sit in the same chair every night and doom scroll, Atomic Habits says move the phone and change the cue. You Are What You Love says notice that this routine is teaching your loves, not just passing time. That is a more searching diagnosis, and it explains why stubbornness can feel so spiritual, even when it looks practical. The self-control chapter in Atomic Habits is the clearest argument against brute force change. It says habits are often encoded so deeply that simply resisting temptation is a short-term strategy, not a long-term one. In other words, your stubbornness is often not cured by more guilt, but by fewer triggers. This is where the book's inversion becomes powerful. Make bad habits invisible. If the behavior you keep repeating is overeating, scrolling, or wasting time, the answer may be to remove the cue instead of debating with yourself all day. If you are serious, put distance between you and the trigger. A right application would look like this. You keep reaching for your phone when work gets hard, so you leave it in another room for a few hours. Wrong application, you keep it next to you and promise again that this time will be different. The first choice reduces friction for good behavior. The second choice relies on self-image and hope. James K.A. Smith gives that same struggle a different frame. He says you cannot merely think your way to right worship or right desire, because many of your deepest leanings operate below conscious awareness. That means a stubborn person can absolutely know the right answer and still be pulled by a deeper script that has been trained into him through repeated immersion. This is where the two books can be combined intelligently. Atomic Habits helps you cut off the cue. You Are What You Love helps you ask why the cue had power over you in the first place. One makes the temptation harder to reach. The other makes it harder to mistake temptation for truth. This is where You Are What You Love becomes especially useful for stubbornness, because it says a person may not love what he thinks he loves. That is a serious claim, and it lands hard on anyone who says, I know what is good for me, so why don't I do it? The answer may be that your habits are not only delayed intentions, they are signs of what has been quietly trained into your heart. The book uses the idea of liturgies to explain how repeated practices shape desire, sometimes without your awareness. That means stubbornness is not only a failure of discipline, it can also be a mismatch between your conscious beliefs and your deeper practiced longings. You may say you want health, peace, wisdom, or maturity, while your daily rituals keep feeding restlessness, distraction, vanity, or appetite. The wrong way to handle that, in James K. Smith's framework, is to assume information alone will fix you. He explicitly argues that you cannot recalibrate the heart from the top down with mere information. The right way is to submit yourself to counterformative practices that retrain your loves from the bottom up. That is why You Are What You Love keeps returning to worship, confession, and repetition. It is trying to show that the heart changes through practice, not just explanation. For a stubborn person, that means you do not merely need to know that you should change. You need a life that repeatedly hands you a better script until your instincts begin to move in the right direction. But Atomic Habits would push back on one possible mistake here. It would say that even noble intentions about identity and worship still need concrete behavioral design. In other words, if Smith tells you to retrain your loves, Clear asks where, when, and how that retraining happens in ordinary life. That pairing is stronger than either book alone. One of the strongest images from You Are What You Love is its insistence that you can be immersed in something for so long that you stop noticing it. That matters because stubbornness is often not dramatic defiance, it is just living inside a pattern so long that it feels normal. The book's point is that you need to wake up and ask what story your routines are telling you. This gives a deeper explanation for why some people can know all the right productivity tips and still stay stuck. Their problem may not be missing knowledge, it may be that their daily world keeps catechizing them into distraction, consumption, or comfort. That is why Smith treats even seemingly neutral habits as formative practices. Atomic Habits offers a practical response. Redesign your environment so the good cue is obvious and the bad cue is hidden. You Are What You Love offers a deeper one. Reinterpret the environment as a training ground for desire and choose practices that point you toward a better end. Both agree you are shaped by what surrounds you, but Smith is more concerned with meaning, story, and worship. So if you are stubbornly stuck in a loop, you need both questions. What cue is pulling you, and what kind of person is that cue trying to make you become? That second question is the one Atomic Habits does not fully answer, and it is exactly where You Are What You Love shines. If the problem is that you know what is good for you, but do not change, Atomic Habits offers the sharper practical toolkit. Make the right action obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying, while making the wrong action invisible, unattractive, difficult, and unsatisfying. That is the best answer when stubbornness is mostly a failure of setup, friction, or forgetting. But if the problem is deeper than that, You Are What You Love argues that you are not only fighting a bad routine, you are fighting a rival formation of desire. In that case, the best answer is not just a better system, but a better story, a better set of practices, and a better set of repeated loves that slowly retrain what feels natural. The strongest conclusion is a hybrid one. Use Atomic Habits to design the behavior, and use You Are What You Love to examine the heart that behavior is trying to shape. If you do only one, you may get compliance without transformation or insight without change. If you do both, you have the best chance of turning stubborn knowledge into stubborn action.